Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now going to be diving into the overall takeaways from this season of Hard Knocks that followed the Chicago Bears. For those of you who aren't aware, Hard Knocks is an HBO docuseries that they do every year following an NFL training camp, and this year they did the Chicago Bears, which is a team that definitely has a lot to prove this upcoming season, and ultimately I think that the biggest thing I got out of this, because you only get so much of the actual football reps or anything like that, I think the big thing is I was already growing on the infrastructure of Chicago. Now, if you asked me this a year ago, I would have been a little bit more skeptical, specifically with general manager Ryan Poles, as to whether or not he is doing a great job. I think that he's made a lot of moves, and he's taken risks, which is a good thing, but we also saw a pretty disastrous trade of giving up what ended up being, I believe it was the first overall pick of the second round in 2023, and ultimately they traded that for Chase Claypool, who just never panned out in Chicago. So Poles has had his hits, but he's definitely had his misses as well. And he's been aggressive, which is a positive, but at some point, if you're being aggressive multiple times and you're missing, you're just losing. So, I know, I'm not saying that it's been the utmost confidence always for me with Chicago, but I've been a fan of Matt Eberflus since he was hired. Maybe I'm naive about it, but I do sort of get something out of the idea of the reports with Eberflus is that he connected with the team really well. That, again, this is such a cliche storyline that I've sort of latched onto, but this idea that he walks into meetings and doesn't have a list of notes that he's just reading off of. He goes in empty-handed and just speaks from the heart and tries to connect with his team. And again, I know that when we're talking about football, it's all about, toughness and everything like that. But I do feel like in order to be a successful head coach, you have to be able to have some level of relatability to your players. I thought at the end of Bill Belichick's tenure in New England, there was a very clear divide between him and the players. And maybe it's just this whole new age of the NFL with this younger generation that, not coddled, but the idea of connecting a little bit more. But not just the fact that he is, a nice guy or anything like that. I do think he actually knows his stuff when it comes to defense as well. That is his background. And last year especially, where I started to, because, Eberflus's job, I think, was a little bit on the hot seat last season, but the fact that they closed the season the way that they did with their defense playing like a top 10 group after, it had taken a while to really see a lot of these key defensive players shine. And that's one of the other things that I think that Hard Knocks showed as well, was it kind of put people on it more so to some of the key players on defense, because headed into last season, I definitely was unsure about a lot of their defensive pieces, and you start to see the likes of, I think the biggest one that people sort of came away from training camp with, or Hard Knocks with, was Jalen Johnson, who had just signed a contract extension earlier in the offseason and had played like one of the top cornerbacks in the NFL for a little bit. So it was less so that, but then you start to see other names that I think are important to keep in mind. That secondary, you have Jaquan Brisker, hard-hitting safety. Kyler Gordon is more of a nickelback, but again, he can lay the stick and is also pretty good in coverage. Tyreek Stevenson ended up having a really good rookie season for them. So ultimately, this is a Bears defense that was taking a little bit of time to develop, but they add also the likes of a TJ Edwards and a Tremaine Edmonds over the past couple years. They make the trade for Montez Sweat at the trade deadline last season. And again, from that point on, Sweat produced and the defense produced as a whole, to the point where you can see sort of the direction this team is heading in, and that it's not a complete dumpster fire. And now you add on top of that the selection of Caleb Williams, who, you can only get so much in terms of the actual football analysis out of a docuseries like this, but I think that it was really cool. It was in the first episode, I believe it was, where they saw Caleb Williams throw an interception in a scrimmage, go over to talk to offensive coordinator Shane Waldron about the mistake that he just made, and then a couple minutes later, they basically dialed up the same exact play, and it ended up in a touchdown. And just that idea that he's communicating with this organization, that they are trying to do the best that they can after a lot of people have very much criticized the Bears for sort of butchering the Justin Fields tenure after taking him in 2021, and really they did not do a good job of surrounding him with talent and giving him a situation that he could succeed in. But now I think that with Caleb Williams, they are doing everything that they can to try and just show him how to grow as a player. They know that he is an elite talent, but ultimately this is a situation where he is stepping in and he has massive expectations on his shoulders, being the number 1 overall pick, being one of the most highly touted quarterback prospects in recent history, to the point where I think that ultimately, this is a situation where I am buying into the long-term infrastructure of the Bears. And that's not something that I would have expected to be saying a couple years ago. But I feel like they're at this point now where this is a little bit of a make or break season to some degree as well, considering the fact that Matt Eberflus does sort of have his job on the line. They desperately need the quarterback's position to pan out for them. They've had multiple number 1 overall picks over the past couple years, and they decided to pass up on not just Bryce Young, who ended up going number 1 overall in 2023, but also CJ Stroud, who had one of the most impressive rookie quarterback seasons that we've seen in recent history, maybe in NFL history altogether. So I do feel like this is a situation where I can feel good about the process right now, but there is also still a lot of proving to be done from the Bears organization this upcoming season. And ultimately, him and Ryan Poles, they need this to work out for them. And I have confidence in that. And it was kind of funny seeing as well, a lot of the internet made a big deal about it, especially because it's the Giants of all teams. But Joe Shane, their general manager, there was a clip towards the end of last night's episode where they were both at the Clemson-Georgia game from this past weekend scouting, and Joe Shane said to him, it must be nice not having to evaluate that quarterback position anymore, which obviously with the Giants, with Daniel Jones, with how much of a storyline that it obviously is, the internet ran with that a little bit. But I mean, it's true. It's just about sort of putting the surrounding pieces outside of him to make sure that they are set for the upcoming future. So ultimately, again, I'm buying into the stock of what I already was sort of leaning with the Bears are in the right track. And now that they have ideally the quarterback in position, I do think that they have the coach. Again, Ryan Poles, he's made some bad moves in the past, but when you talk about just the personal connections that Eberflus and Poles were able to demonstrate during this season's series of it, I think that it is the right way to operate under, the sort of new times with where we are at in the world and, with this next generation of athletes that's coming up right now. I believe in the future. I believe in the infrastructure, and the Bears are going to be a team that is going to be vying for a playoff spot this upcoming season. I would say, generally speaking, there are two things that are really, up in the air a little bit. It's the idea of, can Shane Waldron be a good offensive coordinator? I'm curious to see how this pans out for him. He spent the past 3 years in Seattle as their offensive coordinator. Ultimately, it was a mixed bag. It was pretty middle of the pack in 2022. The Seahawks were, widely speaking here, statistically, a top 10 offense in the league. That being said, I'm also a big fan of Dave Canales, who was with the Seahawks as the passing game coordinator that year. He moved on to the Buccaneers in 2023, and the offense took a step back. Now, it's not like the Seahawks. They have their receivers, absolutely, and I do think that they have good running backs, but it's not like it's the most talented offense in the world anyways, with Geno Smith and some question marks on the offensive line. But I'm curious about Shane Waldron. I'm curious about the offensive line, where a lot of people are sort of burying the Bears because of the offensive line, saying that they aren't going to be able to hold up. It's actually a pretty decent offensive line. It's not going to be top tier. It's not going to be, among the elites of the world, but they should be able to give Caleb Williams sufficient time to operate and ultimately, sure, there are questions about Caleb Williams, but, I think we just have to see how that plays out. I am a believer in him personally. I know there are people who aren't either, so it's not like you can just shoo him in to be a success in the NFL, but they at least have a temporary answer at that position. These next couple years are going to be about continuing to build on the culture that they've established these past couple years and seeing what they have in Caleb Williams, because it's not often where you get to sort of parlay one first-round quarterback directly into another first-round quarterback and actually be in a better position than you were previously. So, again, I'm buying stock in the Bears long-term, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We are going to finish off the show today by switching gears a little bit to college football, where yesterday we got the new AP poll rankings, and we're going to be diving into that. But first, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.